Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast, the series where I speak to people who can help us to understand the risks of human decision making and what we can do to mitigate them. Now, I spend a lot of time exploring situations where I'm asked to do things that feel uncomfortable, tedious or irritating. That's because they help me to think differently about how we can manage human risk. Very often when we're forced to endure processes that induce the reactions I've described, then we react badly to them. If we want people to behave in a particular manner, then we need to work with rather than against the grain of human thinking. A good example of a process I've generally found to fit that bill is when I've interacted with the insurance industry. With some very notable exceptions, it's normally a case of me feeling like I'm being ripped off. Very often, I'm buying a product that I know is going to require me to get into a fight if I ever have to make use of it. That's no fun at all, and I resent it. And I'm not the only one. Some people resent it so much that they react by doing what I'll politely call overclaiming. It's a real problem for the insurance industry. So I was really intrigued when I heard about some research that my guest on this episode, Benny Cheung, had undertaken, which highlighted how behavioural science can help reduce people's propensity to make overinflated claims. I thought it would be interesting to speak with him about what he discovered and to learn more about the drivers of human behaviour when it comes to insurance. Because what we can learn about how people respond to their insurance company can help inform how we influence their behaviour in other human risk-related contexts. What works in one situation where people aren't necessarily positively disposed towards a process can have lessons for others. So please enjoy my conversation with Benny Cheung on insurance. Benny, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Christian.
Listen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I know we're going to have a fascinating conversation, but before we dive into that, can you just give my listeners a sense of who you are and kind of what you specialize in?
Of course. So I actually come from a life science background. So I did my PhD and a postdoctoral research fellowship from Cambridge universities in behavioral genetics, using an animal model to basically study feeding behaviors. So I use a lovely microscopic nematode worms called C. elegans. So this is eons ago. So in the last 15 years, I've been instead of studying animal genetics and behavior, I've been looking at consumer psychologies and behavior. So I'm now a director at Decision Technology. We're specialized in behavioral economics, behavioral finance techniques to basically study how consumer make decisions and behave.
I'm going to ask you because it is sort of mildly entertaining, but I think also there's some truth to it. Right? So you've literally morphed from studying one animal species to another. And what are the parallels between those two things? I mean, is it as simple as saying in your experience that actually we do have those basic instincts and there is a lot of comparability, or are we fundamentally different in a way that we'd like to think we are?
Well, I think the transferable domain knowledge between the two fields are similar, in the sense that they are both quantitative fields. So it's all a bit of maths at the end of the day. But in terms of the animal behavior versus human behavior, well, I think there are certain transferable sort of elements. I think in the past when I was doing my life science behavioral genetics stuff, I was more sort of coming at a physiological angle and trying to understand the nature versus nurture, how much of the behavior are predicated by our genetic makeup. It turned out that a good proportion of it is predispositioned by our genetic makeup. But obviously, as we know, nurture plays a big role in behavior, and the context, the environment, the surrounding will modify our behavior as well. Which is, I guess, what I'm now focusing more on, albeit in a completely different, organisms.
Right. Fascinating. So, there's one specific bit of research that I do want to pick up around insurance, but can you just talk more broadly around the sorts of things that you're doing when you talk about consumer behavior and finance? What's the sort of scope of what you'll look at?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, as many of your guests in your previous podcast has talked about the issues of behavior. We're a human being. I think is well publicized that in the last 5-10 years, the principle of behavioral economics, behavioral finance, the idea that people don't necessarily always make decision rationally. I guess at DECTech, our mission is to help our clients to predict behavior in the most accurate and kind of cost-effective way, taking into account of, as I said, all the contextual inferences in the real world. So the work that we do mostly center around given a specific context, how would consumer react, and therefore how that changes their decision making and ultimately bottom line for our clients. And this specific piece of work that we were going to talk more in detail is to do with retail insurance, and more specifically opportunistic fraud, which is a very interesting topic because the outcome behavior, if you like, is honesty. So how can we predict what makes people more or less honest? And as you know, and as we will discuss more, opportunistic fraud in insurance, retail insurance, is almost undetected at large. So it presents a very interesting problem for our client at the IFB, the Insurance Fraud Bureau at the time, to try to tackle this issue that cost the industry literally hundreds of £1 million a year.
And so to put this in very simple terms, what you're looking at is the situation where people have taken an insurance policy out, they are making a claim, and at the point at which they're making a claim, now they may have preemptively decided to do this, but bottom line, the moment you're trying to influence is the point at which they're making a claim, where you would say, can we try and reduce fraud at that point of claim, and therefore make sure that you've got people making legitimate claims and not making, and therefore the insurer is only paying out in situations where there's a genuine case. That's roughly correct. what you're looking at, right?
That's correct. So opportunistic fraud are basically fraud that are committed by your everyday consumers, insurance customers, at the point of what we call during the operational communications processes. So basically these are touch points between the customers with the insurers. For example, when they're applying for insurance, they will fill in an application form. On the form, there are various what we call more contentious questions. So questions that they might be tempted to be less honest about, or maybe even lie to us, and in return for lower premium. So as you know, whenever you apply for insurance, motor insurance, for example, you get questions about your previous driving convictions, your claim histories. So those questions, consumers at that point might be tempted to be less honest about, and they know full well, there is a reward at the end of it, which is a lower, premium. Now, the same situation might happen during claim process. As we know, some people are allergic to exaggerate their claims or invent, items that they haven't, lost or robbed during the process. So all those are sort of, on the spot, kind of at the spur of the moment kind of decision people make, and which will cost the industry. And as we know, it has been estimated, it costs the industry up to £1 billion a year. And all the kind of the existing anti-fraud, fraud fighting solutions doesn't really address this kind of fraud very well, simply because, as I said, these are kind of spur of the moment decision that people make. These are not premeditated. So a lot of the, state of the art detection system wouldn't necessarily pick it up. And therefore, the client at IFB was interested to see if behavioral economics can offer solutions, if we can nudge people down the right path at those critical moment in time.
So this is not, just to be absolutely clear, this is you're not looking at what you might call organized insurance fraud. This is literally just someone, not me, obviously, but someone like me comes along, and as I'm taking policy out, I look at it and go, that's a bit expensive. Wonder if I can nudge my premium down by perhaps not disclosing certain things or shifting to the facts a little bit. Equally, when I'm claiming, I'm kind of going, I don't know, if I had a burglary, maybe I'm adding some extra things in that didn't really exist, where there's probably no chance of checking it. And therefore, your point is it's not verifiable as such, but there's kind of, so that number you quoted is just a sort of sense that the industry has that there's an inflation in terms of claims or a kind of misrepresentation of facts. Is that sort of the rough construct?
That's absolutely correct. It is a crime that are committed, as I said, by everyday consumers. And most of the offender wouldn't even realize that they are actually committing a crime, because there is a lot of myth around, this is your chance to get something back from the all evil insurers. There's a misconceptions. So yes, that's absolutely correct. It's not organized crime we're talking about. We're talking about everyday, otherwise honest consumers giving into temptation at that moment in time, and whether nudge intervention prevent an opportunity to steer them down the right path. Correct.
I have some very sort of cynical questions, because that's what I love challenging around. But before we get to those sort of obvious challenges of the thing, what did you discover and how did you go about testing this?
Right. Okay. So the way that we do this is a large scale proof of concept research that we've done. So obviously, we are experimentalists. Our forte, our belief is that, everything, for behavioral science to be a proper science, you need to be able to experiment with it. You need to be able to use, RCT, randomized control trial, to be able to test the proof or disprove hypothesis. And I think this test and learn mentality that is really important, I think, in our field. And sometimes it's not being recognized enough. But anyway, so the way that we test this intervention is by way of a what we call quasi online experiment. So this is basically what we do is we replicated the applications process in a clean room environment online. So we've built an online application for motor insurance process on our own platform. We can then get general consumers to come in and go through that processes, and they've been given a cover story, so these are all existing policy holders. So they've been told to, so here you're looking for motor insurance, you landed on this insurer's webpage. Please complete, the process for the applications as you would in the real life. Answer the questions and get a quote. Now, different sales of people are invited to look at a slightly different versions of this application process. The application processes differ in the way that so in one scenario, there's no intervention message that are being shown, whereas in another scenario, an intervention message are being shown at the time when they're answering a contentious questions. For example, have you been caught speeding in the last 5 years? So you imagine if the intervention, the nudge, the behavioral nudges that we're using, if they worked, then you would expect on aggregate, the sales of people that have been exposed to that nudge would have, on aggregate, proportionally admitted to that question at a higher proportion. So this is to say that in a control experiment, people might be, is incentivized to lie. So they saw this question, they will make the connection of, if I say no to these questions, my premium will go down. And therefore, a higher proportion of people will say, no, I've never, been caught speeding in the last 5 years. Whereas in the test condition, when they saw the intervention, if the intervention worked, then a higher proportion of people would admit that they have indeed been caught speeding in the last 5 years. So the experiment works in this way. So different sales of people come in and see a different version of the application process, and all the application processes differ in in whether an intervention is shown or not, and also what intervention has been shown. So in this study, actually, the first part of this project, this work, is to do with coming up with those candidate intervention message that we could use, and we come up with 18 such interventions based on kind of existing theory of this kind of nudge messages that have been applied elsewhere and have been shown to be effective. So principles such as priming, I'm sure these are all sort of everyday principles that us behavioral scientists talk about. So priming, this is people like to be consistent with with the surroundings, and if you show them something that remind them of the concept of honesty before they even start the process, they might become more honest as they they go through the process. There are concepts that are to do with norming, social norming. So people also like to be consistent with their peers. So if you tell people that 95% of the consumers are the customers, fill in their form honestly, then there may be a chance that they want to keep up with the Joneses and become honest themselves. And the self-consistency. So simply by reminding them that they said that they did say that they're going to be honest. So this is get them to sign a honesty pledge at the beginning of the whole process, instead of at the end, which is typically how the current process worked. By reminding them that they will be honest at the beginning, they would they might be driven to be more consistent with themselves and therefore behave more honestly later. And then their framing and reciprocation. So the idea of what if you frame the consequence, the highlight the negative consequences, for example, of being dishonest. So this is playing on the loss aversion principle and reciprocation. If you show that the insurer is actually an honest organization, maybe they will reciprocate with honesty. So 18 such intervention has been devised based on these behavioral principles, and then they were then fed into this randomized control trial, our behavioral lab methodology, where different cells of people come in and see a different version of the processes. Either they see an intervention or one of the 18 intervention. Either they don't see an intervention, which is the control conditions, or they see one of the 18 intervention that we have crafted. And by comparing their response towards those contentious questions, we can really sort of gauge at how well each intervention works, relative to the control condition where there's no intervention being shown, and also sort of between the different interventions. And the result is quite staggering, because we saw on average the interventions have a 36% effect size, meaning that it can reduce up to 36%. It sway 36% of the would-be liar within the test group. So, which is quite incredible, because this kind of when we go into this, obviously we have some expectations on how well this might work.
Yeah, you're not going to start by going, this is going to prove nothing at all. You have a kind of hypothesis and a rough idea about what it might deliver, right?
Yeah, but mind you, we have seen plenty of null results as well over the years. I think the problem with the nudge theory is that the context is really important. And I always say that I use the analogy of you can't nudge someone if they are not sitting on a fence. For nudge to work, you need to catch people at a tipping point of the decision, whether they can go one way or the other. And only at that point, nudge have a chance to work. You can never nudge someone into doing something if they're so far off on the other side of the fence. You see what I'm saying? So it's as much as, designing a good nudge, and also, having the right context, being in the right decision, process, catching people in the right frame of mind. Then you have a chance of getting those nudges to work. So before we do this, there's plenty of study that's been published. Some work well, some didn't, work quite well. We have seen, the like of the BIT behavioral, the nudge unit have done studies that show effect size of, 20, 30%. But equally, we have seen studies that, come up with, almost nothing, sometimes even negative results. So our expectation, so I think we are quite open. We went into this with an open mind. So but we are certainly not expecting the kind of the overwhelmingly positive result that we've seen. The fact that, almost every single one of the 18 nudges, I think all bar one show significant positive impact in swaying dishonesty, and an average size of 36% is just, is incredible. And I think, to put it in the scales of all sort of, comparable studies, there's a really big effect size, which leads us to conclude that we might have, hit the sweet spot in terms of, really catching people at a point where they're really sitting on the fence. So, yeah, which I think, you can relate to, in those kind of circumstances. You're filling in your application form, you saw that question popped up, they're probably not going to find out, right? If you lie a little bit, I probably save a few quid. And I think under that kind of circumstances, most of this opportunistic fraud happen. But if you can very timely provide them with a nudge on the right, in the right direction, you can potentially, change their behavior, which I think is what we find out. So yes, good nudge design, but also we kind of, find the context where nudge really works well here. So people are really on the fence.
I mean, this is really interesting because I sort of look at it and think, I hate the insurance generally speaking. There's a couple of experiences I've had that have been kind of okay. But generally speaking, insurance is a thoroughly unpleasant experience. And so when I listen to this story, I sort of think several things. The first one is anybody that can improve that sort of process, right? Go for it, please, because we need that. The second thing is, I think part of the reason this happens is that there is this perception that insurance is a ripoff. And it's kind of structured as us versus them, right? So for every pound, dollar, euro they pay out is a loss to them and a gain to the thing. And I sort of look at it and go, it's a nightmare process. And I get asked a load of dumb questions at both ends of the spectrum that are not necessarily clear to me around what they're doing and what difference they make. And so I think part of the thing here is it's sort of, I approach this thing and I'm like, they are going to rip me off. I view it a little bit like car rental. I just make a natural presumption this is a ripoff. And so I'm going to fight this thing to the best of my ability. And that's why I think your comment around sitting on the fence is interesting, because I wouldn't consider myself to be, I don't set out to be dishonest, but put me in a position where I'm irritated by a process, particularly if you're asking me questions that seem irrelevant or seem nosy or intrusive, that my sense is going to be, for want of a better phrase, screw you. Right, screw you, you're messing. And so I think this is an interesting bit. Where on the one hand, I'm astonished you got the results that you did get, because I sort of would have expected to have a slight impact. On the other hand, I kind of go, I can see why it works, because actually it's a sort of context where it's very easy to tip me into being less than transparent, shall we say?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think just to elaborate, I think your point about, there's this misconception, this myth that, is us against them. And a lot of the, sort of consumer, a lot of consumers have also have the impression that, this kind of opportunistic fraud is victimless, because, right, the insurance, insurers losing a few quid is not going to hurt them, because, they've been ripping people off, for years. I think a part of the element, I think certainly, one, if you like, one approach here, one of the approach of, fighting this kind of opportunistic fraud is in the kind of the PR, consumer education campaign, because it is certainly not a victimless fraud, because, for every dishonest consumers, you're going to push up that premium a little bit for everybody else, because at the end of the day, like, all these add up, and I think consumers do end up paying the price, because as the premium goes up, everybody suffer. So I think our client at IFB certainly think about this in a sort of dual approach. So we want to do something in this kind of operational communication platform. So we want to use nudge to try to nudge people to become more honest. But on the other hand, there needs to be some kind of public awareness campaign to just highlight the fact that this is not victimless. And this is wrong. This is a wrong thing. This is a crime, and this is not victimless. And there's just a lot of reason why you shouldn't be doing that. And those two things needs to go hand in hand, I think, if we're going to address the problem. Now, and also sort of go back to the point of the stuff that we did that I just described. Using the nudge to try to get people to behave more honestly. Another result from the study is that actually all this is happening under the radar. So we asked a set of questions at the end of the process when everybody finished, their application, mock-up exercise and get their premium. We get them to rate their perceptions, their experience towards the process, the experience, and also towards the insurers, albeit hypothetical insurers. And when we compare these perceptions rating across different scenarios that we tested, we saw that there's no significant difference in perceptions between people in the control condition, meaning not seeing the intervention message, compared to those who are in the test condition, so those who have seen the intervention. So how we interpret this result is that these interventions are really working as true nudge, because a nudge should be inconceptible. So you shouldn't even realize that you've been nudged. and in fact, indeed, when we look at this, compare the perception results across the different conditions, we do see that people just didn't pick up, they didn't even realize yet they saw that message. So this is just one small part in an otherwise quite a lengthy process, but it's incredible because it really has an impact on how people answer those contentious questions.
Right. So you're not irritating the hell out of them, because I could sort of say,
they don't know. They don't even know. It's not on their radar at all. Yes.
Right. Because if you got this wrong, you'd have a thing where you'd say, I don't know, somebody who didn't know what they were doing, right, would try and do this thing, and then every page would be some sort of reminder to be honest.
That's right.
And some sort of signaling, and it would actually be counterproductive, I think.
I mean, that's absolutely correct. I think a lot of the craft is in the execution here. I mean, the principle is quite simple. Yeah, you want to give people a nudge at the right time. So what nudge you apply, how often you apply those nudges, at what point of the process you apply those nudges. Those are all these crafts you need to get right. And the price of not getting it right, is it could be very substantive, because you can alienate the consumers, your would-be customers, your prospects, and give them a bad experience that might have implications, downstream in terms of acquisition rate and retention. So there's some craft in it to get it right, and if you do get it right, then it can operate as a true nudge, a very effective true nudge, which is working under the radar.
This is really interesting, because I think it's sort of, as you say, I like anything that's a crass intervention irritates the hell out of me. And I look out for these things, right? So I'm always kind of, what are they up to? What's going on? So in this particular case, what you've basically proven is that it is theoretically possible to insert these things and produce a different outcome in your lab conditions. Now, of course, there are obvious flaws in the thing, right? Which is people aren't actually applying for real insurance. You also don't know whether they have or haven't been totally honest. You've just got a sense based on the average population that something has shifted. And therefore you make the presumption that, given your experimental piece, that what has shifted is people are being honest rather than, let's be ridiculous, rather than bringing up false memories of things. Yeah. So you're basically driving. And so that's a really interesting piece of evidence. I would think insurers would be fascinated by.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I hope so, because certainly we and the IFB, the Insurance Fraud Bureau, hope so. And indeed, this is what we are trying to do now. We're trying to engage the industry, the insurers, to try to implement some of this learning in their real life platform. I think your challenge of, this is in a control environment, clean room environment, is a very valid one. Now, albeit, everything is done in a controlled manner. So we are only reporting effect size. It's all internally controlled. This is to say that, the test scenario are being compared to the control scenario, and both scenarios are sort of under the same sort of artificial control, context, right? So we are only reporting those relativistic difference between the scenario, which makes it more kosher interpretation of the results. But notwithstanding that, I think it's still very important to establish a real world business case, and that can really only be done when you go out and do real life A/B testing, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the next steps here. We're talking to insurers. We're kind of trying to engage them. We want to, help them to first, apply, do an audit of their own operational communication system, and identify where are the opportunities, on their platform to do some of these, to insert some of these interventions. And then the next step would then be, doing a real life, large scale, trial where we're actually going out to real prospect, real consumers in the real life, exposing them to, a control and a test being, with the intervention, and then really sort of measure the bottom line outcome. So if we do it in applications, online motor applications with one, insurers in the real life, do we really see the premium, collective premium dropped for the test condition, for example, because that would be one of the hypotheses that you would have. If intervention really works, then the test condition should come out with a lower premium compared to the control condition where they see no interventions. So yes, I think we are, as I said, we are advocate of testing. I think in experimentations, and the holy grail of testing and experimentation is real life A/B test. But real life A/B test is really expensive and takes a long time to do. So I think this is where our approach kind of fits in very nicely. So it's a proof of concept approach. We tested 12,000 motor insurance policy holder, but we were able to look at quite a big number of candidate intervention, 18 of them, which you will find it hard pushed to do it in a real life trial. So that in itself, sort of, act as a very good sort of, upstream filter of the different, proposition ideas. And then when you come down, to the real life A/B test that, the insurers is going to do, they don't need to test all 18. They can just test, the 2 or the 3. So really massively reduce the scope of, that are required to get a valid result. So yes, so indeed, that's what we're currently doing, trying to engage the insurers and build a real life business case.
And it's interesting. So the counter argument to what I've said is, if you took a sort of pharmaceutical example, right, the way to find out whether, let's pick a COVID drug, to find out if that works, right, you need to unleash it on people who have the disease. But we choose not to do that in the pharmaceutical space because we want to experiment in a laboratory conditions and make sure that we understand what are the potential downsides of this thing. So we test that stuff out before we even think about rolling it out in the field and doing sort of proper field trials, before we roll it out more generally.
Correct.
So
Correct.
In a way, what you're doing is within the spirit of the sort of science part of behavioral science, which is you're testing this thing with all the limitations that come from testing it in a kind of laboratory conditions. But what you've demonstrated is we think there's enough kind of juice, for want of a better phrase, to be able to say this is worth trying in the real world. And there is a strong likelihood that if you try something like this in the real world, you'll get the outcomes you're looking for, as opposed to it's marginal, or guess what, this might go hideously wrong and go the other way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And based on the this control, clean room proof of concept study, I think the implication is that, this is highly likely to work. As I said, we seldom, even, in previous studies that we've done ourselves, we seldom saw effect size of that magnitude. So and we have done this in multiple rounds and looked at as I said, different interventions, and all those results are just consistently positive, which prompt us to think that we are really hitting this thing at a sweet spot, and this is something that the insurance industry need to take notice, because we're talking about savings running into hundreds of millions of pounds a year. I think our estimate is just under 400 million a year potential savings for the insurers. So I think you're right. So I think seldom I would talk about a quasi experiment with this kind of confidence, and it's just this consistency and the scales of positive results that we've seen make us just feel really confident with this one.
It's interesting because I come back to the comments I sort of made before around people's perception of the insurance industry.
Yes.
Which is that it feels, and I'm generalizing hugely, and I recognize, as I say, there are some really good exceptions, and I've had some phenomenal experiences with some insurers who've just done exactly what I wanted, played the right. And then there's other ones where you go, you are just being unpleasant and chiseling me. I mean, my favorite example, I won't name the insurer, is I had a motorbike stolen, and the processes I had to go through, which involved the questions, when did you last have it serviced? Utterly irrelevant questions for the thing I was trying to claim on. And it ended up with me actually having to write them I decided to write them a letter. I wrote to the CEO saying, you should be aware I used to be COO at your chief regulator, factually accurate, and I will not hesitate to pursue you until you pay this out. Magically, I get a letter the next day saying, there's been a terrible mistake. You don't need to have a discussion with our engineering department. And I just looked at it and went, this is utterly usurious. And I love the fact that I got the outcome I wanted, but I also look at it and go, I'm in a very unusual position, and I shouldn't have to play that game. And I shouldn't have to quote the fact that I used to work at the regulator, and I shouldn't have to kind of threaten them and play nuclear war with them. And one of the things I think is interesting is when you talk about that whole business model, there's a thing, we need consumers to be honest. I mean, the flip side is we also need the insurance companies to behave in a manner that seems and you can't just tell me you're being good, because I will judge you not based on how you tell me you'll behave, but I'll take, then this is where the behavioral science thing I think comes in. I will take stories from friends. I'll go on whatever the insurance equivalent of TripAdvisor is, I guess, maybe, I don't know, one of these comparison websites. Yeah. And I'll be looking for, because insurance, you don't know how good it is until you claim. You have no idea, which of course is a really interesting dynamic. And so what you're sort of dealing with here is, and this is why in a way the results are quite surprising, because I would have expected people to go, right, insurance companies, and I would have thought that people would be deeply irritated by being told to be honest. And I know you won't have been that crass, but sort of subtle messaging going, you need to be, I would find that in a way slightly irritating, because I would go, it's all very well you telling me to be honest, but how do I know that? And in a way, the whole insurance process is all around, it's skewed towards an expectation that the consumer needs to be honest in terms of the taking the process policy out, and honest in terms of the claim. And it's only then that the insurance company gets to show its hand, which is how is it going to respond to that thing. So this whole process is, I think it's an interesting, when you think about the design of the process, it sort of requires me, it's asking a lot of me. I'm being asked to pay money and be honest upfront twice. Yeah. Whereas there's no expectation on them. And in fact, and I know some of this is regulatory, but you make me go through some god-awful processes where you're asking me questions that frankly are either stupid or irrelevant. And they might be relevant for some cases, but so I think it's a really interesting thing. And the fact that you've managed to persuade people going through a version of that process with all of that psychology, I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think persuade might be a too strong a word. I think, as I said, this is nudge, and people don't even know that they've been nudged. But I think I totally agree with your point. I think what you're pointing towards is kind of a different problem, a much bigger problem. I mean, this is to do with the whole the journey, consumer journey. Like, at the moment, I think a lot of the insurers would put their hand up and admit that, they could do a much better job at making the journey more frictionless, more ergonomic. And for whatever reason, I think I would, which I suspect most of these are legacy reasons. They're not. The processes are nowhere near perfect. And like you said, if perhaps there are lots of scope in actually quizzing and really interrogating that process more methodically, to look for way of just improving that. We're looking for reciprocations here, so we need to convey that consumer insurers are not, or the insurers need to convey that they're not out there to get people, to scam people, and I think a lot of it is in the kind of communication platform, the user experience. Yes, there's a lot of room to optimize that. And I think, some, sort of new age insurtech company out there are starting to tap into that space. Now, I don't know if you're aware of American online only insurance company called Lemonade.
Yes, very aware. Yeah.
Well, that's one example of how it could be done in a very consumer friendly and kind of mutually honest way. I mean, they have a very transparent price model. I mean, they would tell you, they would take a quarter of the premium, for operations, and then the rest of it is for paying, claims. And then whatever left, they, it will go to a nominated, charity of your choosing. And the whole sort of communication platform process, the user experience is very streamlined. You can get a claim, within seconds. Famously, they advertise on their platform. So I think it is in the radar of the industry in general, but then it is hard to change, in just one day, because a lot of these platform are sort of they have legacy problem, and it would take time, I think, for them to change it. But there's good intention, and certainly the disruptor, the newcomer, are already sort of looking at this seriously and taking market shares from the incumbents.
Right. Which generally makes people shift their behaviors. Like I love the Lemonade model, because I think it removes that perceived conflict of interest. And just sort of makes, therefore they don't care if they pay out or not. And the battle I'm having then is not me versus insurer, it's me versus my chosen charity. I'll think a little bit more carefully about whether I take that money, because I'm not ripping them off, I'm ripping off a charity. And so I think that for me is like a super powerful shifting of incentives that works. But it's interesting that, I think one of the other things that they do very effectively is when you take out a policy, you're allowed to flex it. And so you can see what impact having. So good example is it's contents insurance. Good example is if I increase my contents insurance by another $500, what does that do for my premium? And I think one of the things that's fascinating is in the traditional question, sorts of things you're talking about, is that often you get asked questions and you kind of go, is that relevant or not? And I can go and game the machine by going put another application and see what happens. And I think one of the things there is, as you're talking around this piece, I think one of those things would be very helpful to sort of, and of course not done in the way that you get a lot of companies that sort of go, your car hire always comes to mind. Oh, have you thought about this risk? I don't know, like fuel. You should buy your fuel from us because it's cheap. And you kind of go, I don't trust these people. They're just trying to add more on. Yeah. They're just trying to sell me additional services. But I think there's something interesting that kind of takes the logic of what you've done further. That would sort of say, if you can get more transparency at that start point, then I think you've got a greater likelihood of people going, all right, okay, I now understand the purpose of that question. Now, the flip side to that is if I see that disclosing my speeding has a negative impact and it costs me an extra couple of $100 because I've been speeding, as opposed to then of course you're reversing that temptation because you're sort of showing me why it's a really good reason to lie. And so I think there's a fascinating balance to be struck here in terms of that transparency piece. But, what you're driving at is quite fascinating in terms of sort of where it might take these hideous processes, or as I see them, hideous processes at the moment.
Yes, I think that's right. I think it's, the design of the consumer journey, which, essentially I think is a UX. Is part UX problem, part communication problem on this insurance, platform is a big challenge. As I said, that is where our sort of test and learn ethos would come in and can help, because it's a lot of it takes a lot of resources to do one of these real life platform changes. Like you say, what happened if we allowed people to flex all the individual parts, as they were, going through the quoting process, rather than, let them go through the whole process, and then there's the end figures. And if you want to do it again, you have to start over again. All those sort of UX kind of design variants can be are imminently testable in one of these kind of, quasi control experiment, RCT. So yes, I think, yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement, but the details, the devil is really in the detail, because how you present, how you design the journey, how you frame your messages might have an impact, and there are plenty, potentially plenty of interaction effect that you can't foresee reliably. For example, what happens if a nudge play combined with the fully flexing models, maybe that is going to work against each other. So I think my take on this is, yes, there's lots of room for improvement. Really should be flagged as a very important area for innovations and development. But test and learn should be at the heart of it. And you can't rely on real life test and learn, because there's just so many variants out there. You need to somehow shortcut the whole thing, and a quasi experiment, like our behavior lab approach, maybe solutions here.
And then, so as you talk about it, and this applies to a whole host of interventions. I kind of specialize in looking at compliance and ethics space, and I look at that and go, largely that's an attempt to influence people's behaviors with very, very little, if any, thought for effectiveness. So it's based on a theoretical presumption around, compliance programs typically are assessed on their theoretical effectiveness. They don't call it that, but that's what it is, right? Because you're not thinking about any of the aspects, and it's kind of like it's a sort of, the employee will go through this experience because I've employed them, right? And they're just going to suck this up because that's I have that right. And we know from experience that doesn't work in loads of other contexts. And what I find fascinating is when you sort of explore what you're looking at here in this in the insurance context, is it's kind of obvious that it's going to provoke reactions in people and behaviors in people, just because of the construct and the process and the bureaucracy and all of that stuff screams people aren't engaging in this in a way that you'd want them to, because they feel under pressure, they feel ripped off, it's complicated, it's bureaucratic, it's tedious. Particularly when I'm claiming I've taken out this goddamn policy, I just want to be paid out, and so on and so forth. And so I find it really fascinating when you talk about these things. And, your conclusion, I think, is entirely right, which is there is a shift, it's happening. We've seen new people come in, and what we're doing is helping move that journey along. But it's amazing that nobody's thought to do this before. So I find it astonishing in a way that we're sort of having this discussion now. It would have been feasible to do this 10, 15 years ago, but if not before. But it's fascinating that it's not happening. And I'm sort of intrigued as to the genesis of the project. Was it you guys going to the industry? Did the industry come to you? How did that come about?
Well, as I said, the project was initiated and commissioned by the Insurance Fraud Bureau. This is an industry body, and they are tasked to fight fraud in the insurance industry. So one of their mandate, at the time, was to start looking at these kind of opportunistic fraud issues. It's a really tricky area of fraud, because, as I said, a large part of it is undetected. And the traditional kind of fraud anti-fraud approach just doesn't really work here. So it's largely initiatives led by the IFB, and their conclusions is that because all the incumbent approach are not really working, and therefore we need to think outside the box, look elsewhere, and perhaps behavioral economics can offer solutions, because these are otherwise honest consumers. So the initiation of it is by the IFB, and then we got engaged, and then we got really sort of interested in the topic, as you said, and as you would, as you can imagine, being a behavioral scientist is a really interesting topic because it's to do with consumer honesty. And but I do acknowledge your point, which is the wider point of, yes, I mean there is a larger issue at bay here, which is the whole sort of consumer confidence, managing consumers' experience, and why this hasn't been done earlier. Why do we do it now? I mean, to that is like, I mean there's a lot of innovations that when we look at it retrospectively, we would just say this is a no-brainer.
Right.
Why didn't people invent an iPod earlier? When we're listening to I don't know, cassette tapes and CDs. I think great innovations would have that kind of property. When you look back, you say, this is such a simple idea. Why didn't anybody thought of it earlier? And you take disruptors to come in and to kind of bring that impetus for the rest of the field, especially the bigger guys, to follow the lead. And in this case, your insurtechs, I mean, they're all coming in and disrupt the market, and that is their role. So that's the way that I look at the problem.
Right. Yeah. And look, it's really easy to criticize, and I understand wholly, having worked in organizations that are big and both on the government side and in the private sector. And it's really simple to sort of sit there and go, well, they should do this. Life is never that easy. And of course, there's a multitude of reasons. On the other hand, the point remains valid, right? It was totally feasible to look at this stuff.
Right.
This isn't a sort of new territory. And so I find it really interesting that it's sort of, that it's now hitting the radar in particular ways. But as you say, you've got to take an industry that's structured around a certain business model with you. And maybe these disruptors is that people see that coming and go, whether we want to or not, we're going to have to shift on that piece. So where are you at in terms of done the piece of work, it's produced these results, and now you're waiting for someone in the industry to go, we will have a bit of that and we'd love to roll with it. Is that sort of where it's at?
I think that's the gist of it for sure. I mean, we are already talking to several insurers and with the view of actually applying, as I said earlier, on their platforms, and we're hoping to build a real life business case. And therefore, encouraging other to jump on board. I mean, as you said, I mean, there is still a challenge because these are big sort of especially the bigger insurers. There is a big machinery. Everything needs to be working in sync, to make something like this happen. And I think at some insurers it's more of a challenge than others. But slowly and surely we are sort of making that happen. And I think from our perspective, this is we are looking at the end outcome here, which is it's got a strong sort of consumer benefit and outcome, which is lower premium for everybody. And I think, as the behavioral scientist, I think that is kind of, the ultimate goal that we're trying to drive here. Making everybody do the right thing, and therefore, everybody can benefit from it.
So let me just challenge that though, because you said it's low. I mean, clearly it's not going to be lower premiums for everybody, right? Because the money has to come from somewhere. So at the moment, what you've got is a situation where people are fraudulently paying less or overclaiming. And so it's not a case that everybody will benefit. But what you're describing is a fairer system.
It's a fairer system, correct? Yeah. So perhaps everybody will benefit is not the right way of framing it. I think on the whole, it's fairer for everybody.
Right.
Yes. It's a fairer system. Yeah.
And so what we're really doing is we're appealing to a kind of societal thing that probably then in some cases does point you towards a thing where some premiums are going to have to go up from where they are. Now they might go up for legitimate reasons, sort of COVID parallel there, right? Which is sort of, you need to do the right thing, not necessarily to benefit you, but to benefit other people. So it's a very interesting kind of social experiment that sort of says the point in playing this game, if you like, if you look at it in those terms, is that you will get a fairer outcome and you'll be able to feel good about yourself and you'll get the right thing. Now, in the majority of cases, that should lead you better off, and you'll have a more pleasant experience because you're not having to all the moral guilt of lying, and that. And it's interesting actually, as you talk about as we think about the process. Of course, if you have lied at the point at which you're taking your policy out, there's the risk you're going to have to lie at the other end as well, which is kind of like, I forgot to disclose something. You have to
remember that what you lied about. Yes,
so in a way, the part of the thing might actually be, it might cost you more money, but this is going to be a much easier process because you're not, as you say, you're not going to have to remember the exact beat.
Strangely, make it less, make it more frictionless.
Right.
Yes.
And I think, and actually, there's an interesting thing there around if you could deliver that stuff, you could make the claims process easier and more transparent, just because people wouldn't be sweating as they went through it.
Correct. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Take the pressure off of the whole process. You have to gain less.
Right. Yeah. So you're not faking it, which is less exhausting.
That's
so
right.
that's a really interesting thing. So we should be watching this space really to see who decides to bite on this thing and what happens. But of course, it's interesting because so here's an interesting. How do you talk about this as a company? So you introduce it. They're not going to want to make a big noise about it because that will draw attention to it. So they sort of have to stealthily introduce it. And that point that you're making around, well, we can present ourselves as being more, we'll present our side about how we're being ethical. I mean, that's an interesting one, right? Because you don't want to, so it's one thing running your experiment that you can talk about to everybody, go, this is a really cool thing. But if I've adopted your piece, I don't want to be, it would be a little bit like a cafe isn't going to turn around to its customers and go, hey, we've just changed our menu to persuade you to buy X, Y, Z. But they don't want to talk about that. So there's something interesting there around how they balance that bigger piece in terms of introducing it.
Yeah, this is never going to make it above the line, so to speak. I think this is going to be an implementation that will just be on their comms platform, and it should be largely not apparent to consumers. So for a nudge to work, it needs to work covertly. And so yes, I mean, I don't think this is something that the industry as a whole will make a big song and dance.
We're now being right.
Not a consumer facing sense, right? But nevertheless, this is something that they should look at. And as I said, there is a consumer facing part of it, which is the kind of the more sort of the public education's part, which is it comes with its own challenge for some of the issues that we discussed earlier. But so that is going to be the consumer facing element of this. But for the stuff that we're talking to the insurers to do now, yes, is very much going to be working covertly.
And there's something interesting in your articulation around how you implemented it. So in your experiment, what you haven't done. And I'll make this presumption because it would be very weird if you had. But what you haven't done is gone, okay, statistically, this individual is likely to lie about this. And therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to target them at that point. So we know that little Johnny here is a boy racer, and he's highly likely to have been done for speeding. So we're gonna go for that thing because that's where we think he's most vulnerable. You haven't done that because presumably you want to avoid that situation because you don't want it to feel like you've been singled out. So you're not, to allay the fears of anyone listening, you're not going through and going, right, let's profile this individual and kind of Tom Cruise Minority Report style, right? Let's profile this individual. Let's work out which particular act of dishonesty they are most likely to perpetrate. And then we'll try and press those buttons. Because one, I think that would probably be inappropriate use of data. But two, if there was any sense that was happening, you'd lose that kind of neutral balance piece. So in a way, what you're doing here, just purely from a sort of effectiveness perspective, is you're not going for micro-targeting of people, Facebook style, where you would go, we'll suss them out, work out what sort of person they are and hit them. Because to your point, if you did that, that is likely to not feel inobtrusive because I'll notice it and I'll go, why are they just pushing me at this point? So there's a random element to what you're doing, I presume.
Yeah, I mean that's right. I think it would be the kind of targeting kind of Cambridge Analytica school kind of practice is going to be controversial and probably uncalled for, and indeed that is not the concept of the nudge intervention theory. So what we are doing here, no targeting at a personal level. All we are doing here is signposting, a general signposting, but placed strategically, tactically, in a timely manner at the right place. And also the actual signposting has been thought of, designed, inspired by, behavioral concepts. But everybody get to see it at the same place, at this, the same message, and then we are nudging people collectively. So some people might not be swayed indeed, right? I talked about 36% effect size, meaning that the other 60 odd percent of people liar didn't get swayed. So everybody sees the signposting, and some of the would be offender got nudged.
Right.
So no targeting involved. Public signposting.
And it's interesting because because you're looking at averages. And so one of the things here is you might have an average may be massively misleading, because there may not be someone that sort of misleads on an average basis. You could have people that are out and out liars, right, where they just everything gets exaggerated, and then people who are 100% honest. And of course, that the average between the two. So there's an interesting thing here that says actually it might have been, and there's an opposite picture to this as well, but it might have been super effective for some aspects of some very, very dishonest people. So you may have taken them one hell of a way that's the equally. You might have missed whole swathes of stuff because you just don't know, because actually you're in a way you're going blind into the size of the problem. There's just a presumption based on mathematical calculations as to the scale of the fraud, for want of a better phrase. But actually, it's almost a different when you're looking at to assess the success of this. You have to rely on averages because that's how we think, but that may not be the way the data lies in reality, and we'll never know that, I guess.
Well, I mean, that's why we need to do real life trial. I think that's right. I mean, the study, the dependent variable, the outcome is an aggregated outcome. We never know at an individual level who have lied and who hadn't. And I think you're right. We'll never really know that unless we start, putting everybody through lie detector tests.
Right.
So yes, we don't. And these are sort of, looked at on an aggregated level. But I will go back to the point that I made earlier. What makes this result convincing to us is how consistent it is. So no matter what intervention you use, we almost invariably see a positive impact. And we have done this multiple rounds, and you always turn out in the same direction and magnitude. So that's what gave us the confidence, and the fact that people don't really it doesn't really change people's perceptions. So
right, and that's worth a hell of a lot, right? Because as you say, the moment you feel like you've been manipulated, yes. you get to a whole host of other unintended consequences.
Yeah, and which is not the intention of this study. I mean, I think the things that we show people, I mean, they are all sort of truth. So we never really craft the intervention in a way that we just show people that are, something not true or real. So all the informations are all verifiable, and they are, they are the truth out there. So we're just placing it at the right time, in the right moment, and for those people that can be swayed, then there's a good chance of swaying them. So I think I think the intention is never to make people to do something that they just otherwise just never wouldn't do. By manipulate is probably the wrong word here. We're nudging, we're nudging, and as I said, only people that are really sitting on the fence that can be nudged. Right. And to your point, there will be, in the 60% that didn't get swayed, there will be just, liars that just wouldn't be, swayed whatever you do. And you can't nudge them.
And equally really good people that don't need swaying.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're finding, in our study, only about, so what is the percentage of lying? I can't remember off the top of my head now, but I think it's only a minority of people that are lying. So we're not talking about the prevalence of the problem is not that widespread neither. So only a proportion of people that are being nudged.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Look, absolutely fascinating stuff. If people want to get hold of you, find out more about the stuff you do, how can they find you?
Well, you can always go to our website. There's the case studies of this work is on our website, dectech.co.uk. Can also follow me on Twitter. My handle is at Benny Dectech. And also, you can reach me on LinkedIn too. So yes, happy to chat more and discuss more.
Fabulous stuff. Well, listen, firstly, thank you for coming onto the show. Secondly, I'll put links to all of those things in the show notes so people can find it nice and easily. But thirdly, I wish you the very best of luck with your quest to get the insurance industry to change. Because as you'll have sensed from my approach to these things, I still view it in most cases as a bit of a burden and unpleasant, and I approach it quite cynically. So that's not to say if any of my insurers are listening that I would mislead. Of course, I wouldn't do that. But I would love it if you could take us to a much more sort of user-friendly, fairer way of that industry operating. So I wish you the very best of luck with the mission. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Christian. One step at a time. We'll get there.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My massive thanks to Benny for appearing and to you for listening. If you're new to the podcast and want to subscribe, you'll find it on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and had a chance to leave a review, that's hugely appreciated. It really does help attract new listeners and to allow me to continue to attract high quality guests. I will be back very soon with another episode of this podcast. In the meantime, stay safe and thanks for listening.